welcome back to another episode of DaFuq Is. I'm Mickey D, and today we're playing Genital Jousting. Yep. So, a quick content warning. This game is intended for adults. It does contain depictions of penises and penetration. So, without further ado, let's begin. So, this is Genital Jousting. Up first, let's have a look at the options menu. So, we have the announcer. You can change whether you want him to talk or not. You can unlock everything in the game. You can play the music. You can have some clear unlocks. You can show the controls. For this, I'm using an Xbox 360 controller. And then you've got the graphic settings, which you can choose windowed mode, the confident, good quality, and the resolutions. And you've got quick options, online multiplayer, and then you've got the new story mode. So I've just loaded this up so I can give it a little go, but let's see what you do on Genital Jousting. As you can see, you are a penis. Yes, you are. And this is you. Your name is John, and you're a penis who needs to find a date for your high school reunion. It's a game about flaccid penises. I can't keep a straight face. And anal penetration, basically. Fucking knock it off. There we go, I knocked it off. Oh shit, now I need to put the apple in my butt. I got it. Yeah, yeah, this is pretty much it. You're a penis. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. Where's the fucking hand? There it is. Get it, you cunt. Alright, there we go. We got it. Oh, for God's sake, I don't want to eat another one. Yeah, this game is all a bit of fun. Yeah, fuck all this up. What the fuck? Shit! No, you can back off! I don't want to be hit. Right. Oh, what the fuck? No! No! Shit!
John woke to the shrill cry of his alarm clock and lay there, rigid, his usual morning condition. But there was another reason John couldn't get out of bed. It was the weight. A weight that had nothing to do with his muscles or fat or sweaty blankets. John was weighed down by a piece of paper. The invitation to his high school reunion. From across the years, the words he'd heard in the schoolyard were still clear. You're a loser. No one will ever love you.
So yeah, you're a penis.
John needed to shower and wash off the sweaty stink of desperate sadness.
This is weird even for me, I'm not gonna lie. Get off the soap, John! Thank you. Oh god, now a toothbrush is up my arse. Yes, you can.
They say cleanliness is next to godliness, but at that moment cleanliness was next to his prostate.
Get out the soap! That'll do. Let's just get out of here.
John had 3 months until the reunion to turn his life around. First, he needed to clean up.
Oh, what the... Oh, dear.
John called it his study, but it was basically for games and porn.
Mostly porn.
So you can stick vibrates up your arse. Let's get rid of that. I wonder. Can it go in your rectum? Get off me! No! Ow, ow, ow! I mean, anything to do it if you're brave enough, right? Oh, shit. Fuck off. Ow. Get off me testicle! Okay, so it doesn't want to go up my arse. Right, where's the dishes?
The only reason he'd ordered so much takeout was because Angel, the delivery peen, made John feel butterflies in his testicles.
How the fuck am I supposed to clean the dishes? I'm hungry, apparently. Have I got to shove a pine? Yes, I've got to shove a pineapple up my ass. Okay. This is a bit weird, not gonna lie. Get off, toaster! Where is the fucking... Oh, good lord. Oh, God.
John suddenly realized the time. Distracted by his new drive to improve his life, he had become late. He needed to hurry, or he'd miss the bus to work. John had left his apartment late.
Wow.
But if he caught the express bus, he might
Very
make
much
it to
human
work on time.
centipede-y.
John didn't
Or
really like
penis
his job,
centipede.
but it had two qualities in its favour.
nasty
One,
vacants.
he could pay his rent, and two, Barbara. Currently John's top candidate for his reunion date. John noticed a moderately attractive peen waiting at the stop.
Hey, baby, how you doing?
He tried to start a conversation and did not get the reaction he'd hoped for. It was probably because he was a minimum wage peen. She could probably sense it.
Push me in front of a bus! I'm fucking sorry! Oops.
The office hummed with cold fluorescent lighting. The air was cold and stale, lifeless. How long had John worked here? Long enough to deserve better. John was late, but he felt daring. He could sneak into the office through the archives, or he could stroll through the front entrance with enough confidence to bluff his boss.
That would have hurt.
John decided to creep in through the archives.
This reminds me very much of the Stanley
Despite the
Parable.
obvious flaws, John thought it was a good plan and not a recipe for humiliation.
Come on, right, I need to destroy those boxes.
There was Carl, napping at work, just like every day for the past month. John envied him.
In true spirit of DaFuq is, I have no idea what I'm doing. But yeah, the reviews on Steam have been good, mostly positive. You can pick it up now for £5 and 39p, I do believe. A link will be in the description below. And yeah, this is pretty much all you do. You are basically a giant penis. Why am I going into the vent? What the... Oh!
Everyone else was hard at work, grinding away. John might actually get away with this. The boss. He homed in on John, deluging him with spit and buzzwords. The boss ran out of synonyms for John's failings and gave him an ultimatum. Barbara would definitely not be interested in dating John if he was unemployed. He had to get to the quality assurance department.
Oh dear. Okay, so there's a red button.
There might be a faulty dildo just waiting to cost the company millions in lawsuits. John would have to test them all. Every atom of John's rectum began to vibrate with the frequencies of pure pleasure. His orifice was a paradise. This vibrator would end all wars. It was good. That one was good too. The Prostate Pounder X900 series, the most advanced vibrator on the market. Sweet mother of no, John, that's too much pleasure for one anus to handle.
What the fuck is going on here? Oh boy. Uh-oh. Ow! Prick yourself again! Oh dear, what's just happened?
John's butt hurt, but his heart was proud. If that vibe had gotten out into the world, it could have injured a customer as badly as it had ravaged his anus. The boss arrived and congratulated John on taking one for the team and jumping on the hand grenade, or in this case, putting it up his butt.
What the fuck?
John was having trouble following the conversation because he was quite high on suppository painkillers. And then the boss said it. Promotion. Finally, the company was recognizing John's hard work and ignoring his minor faults like lack of talent, constant lateness, and flatulence. John's new office smelt like polished wood and success. John's success. Sam dropped by. He'd heard John had been hurt. John said he was fine. He wasn't a softie to complain about a mildly ruptured rectum. Besides, he had a promotion to celebrate. John had met Sam in college during a sports ball game. He'd given him some stiff competition.
Yeah, it's gotta
Not
go!
stiff enough. They'd started at Flesh Corp product testing together. Nothing builds a friendship like a long day of dildo mounting. Yes, John had known Sam for a while. But John couldn't hang out with Sam. He had a reunion to prepare for. He was going out with Barbara tonight. He just had to ask her. Everyone was quiet, listening to the presentation. A good moment for John to ask Barbara out. That's not Barbara, John.
Barbara. Fuck off, woman! Yeah, you go over there.
Barbara agreed. Well, she nodded. Sort of. Things were really going John's way.
Okay. This is
John tried to act as suave as possible and listen to Barbara talk business. He didn't want to blow his chances at long-term love and short-term sex. Barbara began to talk about monthly feedback figures, and John started to zone out, imagining him and Barbara at the reunion, a power couple. She would make his classmates sick with envy, if he could get her to tone down the boring chatter. John's balls were gripped by certainty. Barbara was the perfect date for the reunion. John thought he would impress Barbara by going behind the bar and showing the bartender a thing or two. Despite Barbara's protests that it was unnecessary, John knew that a true gentleman should follow her home. He was excited. There was still 3 months until the reunion, and he'd already landed his perfect date. All he had to do was seal the deal. Barbara thanked John for the evening and politely did not invite him inside for coffee or sex, even though John had dropped some pretty obvious hints he'd be into both, or just the sex. The door
Barbara,
slammed on John's hopes. He didn't understand. He'd laughed at all Barbara's pie chart jokes. He'd listened to her boring stories. The blank eyes of the lawn flamingos were witnesses to John's shame. John began the lonely walk home, thoughts tumbling like shoes in a dryer. He had done everything wrong.
Poor John.
Barbara had led him on just to humiliate him. John felt empty. How could he get love? He felt like he was missing something, some key to attracting sex. But John was shooting blanks. What did Peens want?
This is a sad story.
Then it hit John out of nowhere. Stuff.
More stuff.
He had the success. He just needed to show it off.
Oh dear.
But where was John going to get all the stuff he wanted? John needed a sign. A new day, a new John. He waited outside his local buttload store for it to open, eager to spend his promotion bonus on stuff. The best way to impress women. There's nothing like a rectum full of money to make a peen feel like a man.
Ah! I've got my knacker stuck. Okay, we can do this. How the fuck are you supposed to pee? This one here? Oh yeah, oh no, balls get stuck. Of course they do. That would be too fucking easy. What the real boy we can't do that. There we go. We
Suddenly it occurred to John that he was going to make a lot of choices. And every one of those choices would tell the world who he was. Did he want cheese or sausage? Delicious. Mmm. Also delicious. How could John decide? What would a date think when they sat in John's home? Comfort or style? John went with comfort. Plus, it matched the couch he already had. John weighed up all the differences, but this was a tough choice. John chose the extremely, obviously bad TV. John realized that it was only 2 months and 29 days until the reunion.
Dun, dun, dun.
Time flies. Cactus or rose? Was John a rugged hero or a romantic poet? If John grew his own flowers, then he'd save on romantic gestures in the long run. There was nothing John could take with him to the grave. Except his coffin. Death is inevitable. Style is not. John liked to get his pizza delivered.
Proper.
That way he could see Delilah, the delivery peen. She always made him smile. John knew that Delilah thought pineapple on pizza was an abomination. What bedding would Delilah prefer? John couldn't help wondering. Pizza sheets would show her that John could also deliver in bed.
Devoid of any sense of style, buying new clothes would be John's toughest challenge. He bought an outfit without trying it on. It was a hula skirt. I thought you should know that much. It's not flattering. Music, the food of love. Should John go retro sophisticated or just retro? John was sure he could just pirate extra records.
Every can was made of metal, pulled from the bones of the earth, wrestled to the surface and smelted in roaring furnaces. All so John could buy peas preserved in salty water and stick them up his butt.
I'm having too much fun with this game.
John's new purchases were on the way to his apartment. All he had to do was invite a date over. One look at all his stuff and they'd be overwhelmed with sexual desire. John felt proud and also hungry. It gave him an idea. He should invite Delilah over for dinner.
Interesting.
John was excited. Delilah was on her way. He just needed to set the mood to romance. John hoped she didn't have allergies. That must be Delilah at the door.
The door opened and there was Delilah. John gulped down his nerves and invited her in.
John could tell that Delilah was impressed by his stuff. It was time to crank up the mood to seduction. John wanted to offer Delilah wine, but he'd already popped his cork.
Delilah started looking as nervous as John felt. He assumed it was because she was shy too. They really were compatible. Of course, at the reunion, he couldn't mention Delilah was a delivery peen. That would be embarrassing.
Delilah suddenly headed for the door. And just like that, John was alone again. Delilah hadn't even looked at his stuff. Not even the pizza bedspread. The rejection burned. John felt insignificant. He had everything he wanted. The job, the money, the stuff. So much stuff. He wanted to destroy all of it. Shove it into the abyss. His stuff didn't matter. He was a shaft in the machine. A lonely piston pumping away like all the others in his rigid place. Nothing special about him. Why should Delilah or Barbara or any other peen be interested in dating him? He was just like everyone else and they could tell. John wanted to be special, but he had to face the numb truth. He wasn't. And all the money and stuff he'd ever accumulate wouldn't change that. He thought it would make him unique, but it just made him more like everyone else. He should leave it all. Get out of this little town and go on an adventure. See the world. He was a boring corporate drone, but he didn't have to be. He could be a traveler, exploring jungles and climbing mountains. He could visit the wonders of the world and get his picture taken. Like Peony Island, the unspoiled paradise he'd seen on TV. That was it. John had to travel. Bags packed, John was ready to put 5,000 miles between him and his problems, including his luggage. John was so close, he could almost smell the freedom of the skies. Security sent John back through the detector. John had forgotten he had his nail clippers with him. He'd have to buy another pair soon, or he'd look ridiculous. When the acceleration of takeoff had slackened, John felt a sweet relief. He had left his worries on the runway. He was up in the clouds, on his way to adventure. John's adventure had begun at last, and clearly it was a small world after all, and also a flat one. That was going to piss off the globeheads.
What the fuck? Oh dear Lord. Fuck off, Eiffel Tower! Oh, Big Ben! Oh dear. I can't believe this fucking thing. Ah, snake bit me! Motherfucker! Right on the tip of the penis.
John was having fun.
Fuck off,
But
snake!
something told him he needed to go home. Probably his empty bank account. John was on his way back home. He was out of money, but money can't buy love. What it can buy are the experiences that had made John a more interesting and developed person, with 100 Butstagram photos to prove it. Finally, everything was going smoothly. John felt good to be back on the familiar ground of home, but he would feel better to be on the familiar mattress of home. That's not John's bag. Not that one either.
No!
Nope.
Oh, I've lost John. I didn't need luggage anyway.
Despite John's swell of fresh optimism, traveling was exhausting, and he just really wanted to get home and get some sleep.
Why can't I get on the bus? There we go. Yeah. That is harsh. Why does this keep happening? Poor
Another
John.
nightmare. John's stress about getting a date for the reunion was making him think of her. Harmony. He hadn't seen her in years. Would she be at the reunion? John shook off the thought. He wasn't a child. He was a fully grown penis. John's butt started to buzz. Had he left a vibrator up there? Whatever it was, he should get it out. John's old phone. They really were indestructible. It was Sam calling. He wanted to check in on John. The travel looked fun, but it was so sudden. Was John okay? Sam was such a softie, always worrying about feelings. John had only one feeling, and it was the feeling of being awesome. He could drop Sam a text, but John was on a mission. The reunion was getting closer, and he had to get a date. Fortunately, John knew exactly where to find love.
Oh dear. This is the longest DaFuq is I've ever done.
John held his breath. He was about to meet his match. He had to reassure himself he could do this. He had a good job. He had nice stuff. He had traveled. He was ready to find love. On Weena, where all his sexy travel photos would give him the pick of the pack. Too skinny. Hot. Sexy.
What the fuck?
Too short. Very nice. Too much foreskin.
Yeah, I think.
Nice shaft. Very hot. Not enough foreskin. Gorgeous.
Oh, good lord.
Yep, the pick of the pack.
Fucking hell. I'm gonna call this
Yes!
photo.
John had the pick of the pack.
Why is there a dog and not me? Okay, Amanda, 22. I'm a very dirty peen, if you know what I mean. Oh, God.
John valued honesty in a date, but he had been expecting a different kind of dirty. A sexy and much more hygienic kind.
Fuck. Oh, what the fuck? Oh, God. Okay, that one.
John was scared of getting circumcised so late in life.
Oh! I'm sorry! What the fuck? Oh my god, this took an unexpected turn! Oh god! There's blood! Fuck! Oh my god! This really has took a very unexpected fucking turn. Wow! I'm sorry. Oh, good lord. Oh my god. Oh, fucking hell. Wow. Yeah, so this just went really, really wrong.
Oh, better put that on ice.
Ooh,
It'll be okay, John. Chick stick scars.
oh, no! Oh, god. Oh, dear. Oh, god.
After the reattachment surgery, the doctors had told John to rest. So he did, for 6 hours. Ugh, salty. John was in stitches.
I should stop this shortly. I just can't.
Karen had invited John straight over. She was not fooling around. Very exciting. And now she wanted him round the back.
Way.
Karen let John know that the cake was only for the kids. So was the candy and the piñata. And that she'd be back in 1 hour.
Oh God, please tell me I... What the shit am I doing? Why?
John laughed at Melody's hilarious bullfrog story. She was adorable. Everything was going perfectly.
Oh, Melody!
John never saw Melody again.
Sharona! Must be Alpha, wear a suit.
So far, Weena had been a parade of weirdos and rejections. If this date didn't work out, John vowed to give it up. But maybe this time, maybe today would be his day. Sharona sighed and said, "You'll do."
Why do I get the feeling I'm about to get married? Ooh. Sorry. Coming through.
John felt a little underdressed and a lot overwhelmed. He was surrounded by strangers, and Sharona was glaring at the muscular groom. At least John hadn't missed out on the cake. John realized that Sharona had only brought him to create some penis envy. What a terrible plan, for so many reasons. John got excited. They were going to cut the cake. "He's mine!" Sharona screamed as she launched herself at the newlyweds. Suddenly, teens everywhere were yelling, "No! He's mine!" It was a no-holds-barred cockfight.
Oh, out of it.
As John dodged flying glasses and cake, he felt a stab of envy. The groom had dozens of penises after him, and John had none. It was just wrong.
No! Shit.
John left the screams and explosions behind him. It was a disastrous end to his online dating. He had tried everything, and it just wasn't good enough. Swans were so simple. If you gave them bread, they liked you. But you can't take a swan to a reunion. John was lucky he didn't have any bones to break.
You dickheads.
John wanted what that groom had. Love. Real love. The kind that makes penises fight to the death.
Cut the bus.
Days later, the question was still bugging John. Why were so many penises in love with the groom, but no one loved John?
It wasn't fair. John deserved attention. He had money and Buttstagram pics of his adventures. He even still had quite a lot of stuff. What did that penis have that John didn't?
I've done dishes, I think. Okay, right. Well. Yeah, so. I think I'm going to end it there. I did the dishes, okay.
Then it hit John. That penis was so strong and hard. That's what everyone wanted. That's what John wasn't. That's what John had to be to find love.
Thanks for watching. This has been
It
a
was
weird
time
episode
to
of
hit
Vloggers.
the gym.
I'm Mickey D. Bye-bye.